All right. Welcome, everyone, and hello, how are you? This is Us in Flux Conversations from the Center for Science and the Imagination at Arizona State University. My name is Bob Beard, and I'm a project manager here at the center, where we use the tools of speculative fiction to get people thinking more optimistically about the future. And this project really began back in the spring of 2020, which is 2 years ago now, which just seems bizarre. And it was a way for us to reckon with a lot of the disruption and uncertainty in those first few weeks and months of the pandemic. And now, here we are, 2 years, 3 vaccines, and multiple moments of global weirdness later. And it's clear that we're still in flux as a society. So it seemed appropriate for us to revisit this series. So over the past few months, we've invited a new batch of authors to help us imagine new and hopefully better futures amid this transformative change that we're still feeling. And then we followed those conversations or those stories with a live chat, like this one right here, with an author and a special guest who dug into the themes of the story and helped us think about the multitude of possibilities that speculative fiction can offer us. And so today we have another great panel lined up with a great story that we just published on Monday called The Island. And The Island is a flash fiction story by Elsa Sjunneson. Elsa is a speculative fiction writer, editor, and media critic, and also a disability rights activist. She's a Hugo Award and Aurora Award winner, and her work includes the memoir Being Seen, One Deafblind Woman's Fight to End Ableism, also an Assassin's Creed novel from the series Valhalla called Sword of the White Horse, and she also did an episode of Radio Lab called The Helen Keller Exorcism, and now she's here to chat with you. And joining Elsa to talk about The Island is Laura Cechanowicz. Laura is an expert on world building, and she's an assistant professor jointly appointed here at ASU at the School of Arts, Media, and Engineering, and also in the Graphic Information Technology program in the Ira A. Fulton Schools of Engineering here at Arizona State. We're really excited to have her join us today. Just a couple notes of housekeeping. Wherever you're joining from today, feel free to pose questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And also, to increase accessibility, we've enabled live transcription for this conversation. It's done automatically through Zoom, so please excuse any typos or miscues. You can turn it on by clicking the closed caption or live transcript button in your Zoom window, and then just select show the subtitle. So Elsa, Laura, thank you both for being here, and thank everyone for also watching today. So I think we just jump right in, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So first of all, Elsa, I wonder if you might begin by just giving us a short synopsis of the story, The Island, and what inspired it.
So when I think about the future of disability, I think a lot about the fact that we need to essentially reverse institutionalization. And that's sort of where this story came from. And in institutionalization, disabled people are put in a place away from society, inaccessible, where they're not seen, where they don't take care of themselves, and where they're not treated like adults. What The Island is about creating an intentional community for disabled people that is actually accessible and run by them, not for them. And perhaps that is a place that is away from non-disabled people. Because to be honest, non-disabled people haven't always been great. So while it is away from the society that perhaps a non-disabled person lives in this particular instance, that's not necessarily not a hopeful thing, because it means that you can live in the ways that most suit you rather than living in the ways that suit non-disabled people. So that is what it is about without giving too much away, especially the ending.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Laura, I wonder if you might chat about how this story and Elsa's intentional community resonates with your work in participatory world building and speculative design practices. And if you can just tell us a little bit briefly about the kind of work that you do in those spaces.
Sure. Yeah, I would say my work is largely rooted in this participatory world building and maybe also speculative fiction, even more than speculative design. So working together with communities to identify what kind of problems they're facing. And my dissertation focused specifically on disabilities and also invisible disabilities. So I worked a lot with communities, and as a member of the disabled community myself, having rheumatoid arthritis and other disability conditions. But I worked with groups in Japan, throughout South America, and in other countries to gather, understand what they're facing, and then imagine together what could be the stories of a world that's better for them, for their children, for their engagement with the world as a whole. And the world that we imagined there is one where there's a sort of asteroid crash, and so everybody in the entire world becomes disabled at some point in their life. So this really reimagines the way that we think about disability, because if we know that everyone is going to be disabled at some point, then we start thinking about redesigning the world less as adaptation or universal design even, and looking towards just how do we make it work for everybody in a natural way. And so this, that's what I've been working on.
Awesome. Awesome. So you covered it a little bit in your intro, Elsa, but really the key issue around this story is the necessity, but also the strategy of building a new community, sort of outside the able community. And I wondered if you might talk about this choice to have the stakeholders creating something new from the ground up, and rather than sort of just terraforming or making incremental changes to existing systems. And is this there's certainly some intentionality, as you said, put into this, but also are there examples of this in real life, or is this a space for you to sort of make a statement about the political necessity of that?
I think it's about the political necessity, as you said. Our world, as it is right now, is built with a non-disabled person as the user. That is your default when you think of something that you're building for people. I work in tech, and 90% of my job is talking to people at my day job and saying, there are disabled people who are your customers. And they have to reimagine who is using their products, because it's not just able-bodied people, it's also disabled people. So when I think about how I have to reset other people's brains all the time to imagine a disabled person on the other end of a building, I realize that really we need a different default. And so this is me reimagining from the ground up what the world could be if we stopped looking at the default as a non-disabled person. And I think that's what we would have to do, because right now, even when a building is fully accessible, often those accessibility touches were afterthoughts. And so it's not the wheelchair ramp is in the front of the building. It's the wheelchair ramp is in the back of the building, and it's also where the garbage comes in and out. If anybody has seen the TV show Speechless, they literally turn this into a game called Person or Garbage. So if that is the world that we live in, how can we sort of create a new default when it's so ingrained in our buildings and in our systems? So that's part of why I wanted to make it somewhere that was fresh and new, because where the default is not a non-disabled person, but is a variety of disabled people.
Awesome. Laura, how does this accord with your work and considering the continuum of ability and disability as a design principle?
Yeah, so I think in doing the project and across the course of my dissertation, you sort of realize I realized that, it's not very far from reality, the idea that everybody becomes disabled at some point in their life. I think it's actually probably very true. And that's kind of part of the ability disability continuum, that we have like moments in our life where we might have what you might call like full ability, but then you may have a decreased ability at some point due to even a temporary injury, or as you age, the ability might go further down. And then you can imagine that going down to a part where you need even more help, or you're having even bigger problems navigating our current world. So I think if you look at our world and then consider what Elsa mentioned, that we have these maladapted buildings, and what would it mean if we start all over? There's some really interesting projects like the schools that were designed from the ground up for teaching deaf students, where like they have everything in the round. And this is a really interesting and wonderful opportunity to design from the beginning. And I think we are building enough new stuff that we could be implementing this more already. We are also seeing some really excellent work happening in how we can reuse and recycle old buildings and rethink the way that they're structured and change their purposes. So I think part of that creative process can easily be, how do we build ability and disability experience, this continuum, as part of that redesign process, so that we're not just remaking the space into something different, turning, say, a commercial real estate, which was for selling, clothing, into, say, a play structure for families and children, but also thinking about how do we, when we make that change, just redesign the whole thing to be functional for our entire spectrum of humanity. So I think that's kind of what Elsa's work inspires me to think about in relation to the continuum and design.
Yeah. Elsa, I wondered if you could chat a little bit about the journalist as the window character. This is a person that's invited into the world, but who is still an outsider. And so, again, sort of as a strategy in the narrative, what does that what does that do?
Well, I wanted non-disabled readers to think that they had a stand-in for themselves. And so somebody who is not from the island coming in and sort of looking around and observing what's happening around them becomes a piece of that sort of stand-in for the audience. Because if you, when I had a non-disabled person read it, they assumed that this character was non-disabled. And I was like, great, thank you so much. You have now done exactly what I wanted you to do, because I bait and switch. And so if a journalist comes in and investigates something new, it's a way of opening a window. And journalists are often trying to convince people of something that they need to understand. And so having a journalist who is saying very specifically, we need this place, I want to understand this place, I want this place to have meaning to people outside of this place. Because I think that's part of it, right? Like the journalist is trying to show the outside world what can be different. And that, I think, was part of the hopefulness component that was asked for, is that people would want to know how they could change. And that was precisely what the journalist was trying to show people, was that there are ways to change. So that's why it's journalism.
Okay. Yeah, Laura, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really enjoy that idea and the literary structure of allowing people to relate to this person as non-disabled as they're coming in. And are we okay to do some little spoilers in our discussion?
I think so.
Sorry, I was saying yes. Yes, that's fine.
Let's go for it.
Okay. So I think it's also really powerful when you're talking about it's a bait and switch, because this person appears non-disabled, but then shows up to be disabled at the end. But that could also be the process of a reader, right? Where they are struggling with something themselves, like a mental health issue or a physical disability, and they think they're coming in as an outsider because they have, say, an invisible disability, and they're not even really aware of their own ableism or their own sort of alienation from space and from community in the normal sort of world, in this other world, so that they come here and they realize they have this sense of like peace and community and comfort because, oh wait, no, actually there are some things where I need maybe what you might call adaptations because I do have a disability. So I feel like that's also a powerful moment for the audience to realize that, oh, I thought I was not disabled, but maybe I am also part of this community. I have reason to want to think about how this world could be better for me too, because there are little struggles that I have that are really not built into our world. So I think that's a really powerful and interesting lens. I also like to watch how the journalist and the crew sort of comes onto the island and takes everything in, and the emotional experience of that process. Is it okay if I just go a little further into this, Bob, or did you want to ask?
No, just keep rolling, Laura. I love it.
Okay, great. So, you know, for example, the woman who leads them onto the island, named Isla, which is a beautiful echo of the island. She's the guide, but she's also she has seeing problems, right?
She's blind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you speak about that sort of beautiful moment and the metaphor and the meaning of having her be their introducer, their guide to the whole space as a blind woman, and maybe, you know, not what you might expect if you're thinking in a cliche manner, or so as you're coming onto the island, we can come back to this, but we see this ramp that goes directly into the sea, which I love to talk about too. But then everyone comes on with their cameras and we see their faces, and then we see Isla and we can see that she's blind, and then she's going to be our guide. And I think that's a powerful moment. So I was wondering if you might want to talk about that for a second.
Well, I made her blind because I think that one of the perceptions I'm always trying to sort of take apart is that blind people are unable to guide others and show people around. And so just from a philosophical standpoint, I always want to put blind people at the center of stories in places where you wouldn't always expect them. But Isla is there, and it's hinted at, but it isn't directly said, because she was the one who founded the island. And it's not so much said explicitly in the text, but that's the intention, is that it was her island and she's the one who invited people to join her there, and it was her idea. So of course she's the one showing people around. And no one, because it's a society of disabled people, would dream of taking that opportunity away from her to show people what she had done. And it's not something that's said explicitly, because the character would never say explicitly, this was my idea, because to her it very much is a communal effort. But yeah, that was part of it, was that it is hers. And to me, the idea that a bunch of sighted people are just willing to hop out of a boat and follow a blind woman also just felt really right. Like, yes, go follow her. She knows where she is. She knows what she's doing. Because that's something I wish more people would do, is that they would trust the people around them to know what they're doing.
Yes, that is so powerful. Just to understand that the community can lead what they need.
I think it also says something to how well designed it is, because there is a blind person who can lead a group of strangers around this place with no problems. No one gets lost. Nobody gets left behind. And that tells you a lot about how well designed it is.
Yeah, absolutely. and she walks with all this confidence. You can feel in her stride, her comfort, you know, the way that she's kind of like hugged by the space and the community there. I feel like creates real ownership and like a sense of home, I guess. I think it's pretty powerful. Okay, let's give Elsa a moment.
Yeah, so we will give Elsa a moment so we can you know, get some much needed battery power to her laptop.
Yeah.
So we don't lose this this conversation. So this is a really great opportunity for me to invite members of our audience to you know, post some questions to our panelists. So you can use the Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen, and we will address those questions as they come in. So I have a few more. I know Laura's got a lot of questions, and so let's spend our time together. Laura, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your work, as you said sort of earlier in the conversation, about invisible disability, and it sort of comes back to this this window character that we spend so much time with, and then realizing that this person is, you know, not a, you know, their disability is not, you know, sort of physical and apparent, but it's something that is a part of them. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your work with identity and you know, folks that are on this part of the continuum.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, there's so many things I could say, but there's one thing I'd really love to say. I personally am very moved and become really emotional when I think about the sort of diagnostic process of developing a new disability, especially an unseen disability. When my rheumatoid arthritis began, I wondered if I was crazy because I had this pain that was bouncing around from joint to joint, and you know, others can't understand it. I'd never heard of anything like this. It was really extreme. And I didn't know for some time there what was happening. You know, there's this gap of not understanding what's happening to your body and to your identity until you find some clarity. Some people end up going through this period of unknowing for 8 years. One person that I interviewed was told that they had maybe HIV, which they actually didn't. And then eventually it was lupus, you know, I mean, and then there are tons of catastrophic stories about how there is all this unknowing to what's happening to you. And the reason I bring up this moment is because we have these ideas of who we are, which we tend to hold as if they're like a solid ball of truth. Like, this is me right now. This is all that I compose and what I am made of. I think, you know, social media and branding probably doesn't help complexify that idea, but we understand ourselves as like a solid creation of something, a solid entity. Even over time, we know we change, but we think we're kind of solid. And maybe we go through shifts, but then it's a shift into something solid. What I think happens when you have a disability or an invisible disability that comes sort of later in life is that suddenly you don't have this solid identity anymore. You're a fluid being with really unpredictable future. Your long-term planning is kind of gone out the window for the time being. So your ability to make decisions is dramatically altered. And suddenly you realize you're not this like concrete ball of who I thought I was. You don't know who you're going to become. And you don't know if you'll ever be a self-contained entity again. And you have to kind of recreate yourself with the reality of your body now, whether it's mental health, physical health, etc. Understanding that you have to reincorporate all of these new truths about your well-being into how you interact with the world, which can fundamentally change everything. How you have your friendships, how you interact at work, you know. So that's what I would say about that question.
Yeah, thank you. Elsa, I wondered if you could chat a little bit about, you know, as we have this tour of the island, that the guests are only allowed access to just certain parts of the island, and they don't get to see everything about the island, and they're really not not able to sort of see the full social infrastructure. So can you talk us through that choice?
So one of the things that I had been working through within the context of this story is what happens during, and this is all background that didn't make it onto the page, but disability does not exist well in a fascist culture. And as somebody who is watching what is happening in our world in terms of anti-Semitism, which is really linked to ableism, and what is happening in terms of racism and in terms of anti-disability sentiment, I recognize that there is a component of safety for disabled people when it comes to leaving society. And so there are people on that island who do not want to be known as disabled. There are people on that island who have left specifically because they were not safe. And so the idea that parts of this place are to protect people was really important to me. And to create that, we will let you in to see what we have built, but we also will not let you see everyone. We will not let you see everything, because some of this is private and just for us. One of the spaces that they don't see is a medical area, because to me, a disabled person, medicine is such a traumatic space that whatever they came up with would not be for non-disabled consumption. And so we wanted to be aware of the fact that in the context of this story, there is a possibility of danger. And even if it's not on the page, it's there, because for disabled people in general, there is often danger, because we are a vulnerable population. And that's something that I talk a lot about in my book, Being Seen.
I really love to hear all of the world building elements that did not end up in the story. I feel like they bring so much depth to the way that I think about the story, and I love the revelation of them. So I would love to know more about these secret backstories. And then it's beautiful to see how they show up in little sort of peaks of an iceberg in the storytelling. And to me, it also helps us understand how world building can work, where we can sort of write these stories. I don't know, sometimes in my work, we start with a story, and then from that story, we extrapolate what that world is like. But also you can have this whole massive world behind, and we do this like later in our processes, and then we write stories that show that. But again, like you're showing, there's so much world that's not covered in that story. So I love how your discussion and revelation of these things for us shows how, other writers can be developing all this backstory and then allow it to be woven throughout the story without explicitly calling it out.
Any behind the scenes vignettes that you might give us? Any sort of director's cuts that you can share with us, Elsa?
Well, the original draft showed a disabled mom leaving the Seattle Bellingham area with her daughter. And it was very much the idea that they needed to leave so that the state would not take her child. And that is not something that I made up. That is something that has happened to disabled parents all over the country. CPS will come calling and say, oh, well, you're a disabled parent. You don't have the ability to care for your child. This is not something that's all that far away from reality. And so that was one of my starting places, was what would make you want to leave? And one of the things that I know would make me want to leave is if CPS said you can't have your kid because you're deafblind. And so that was one of those stories that was interwoven sort of as this is one of the stories that brought someone here to this place. But it's not the only story. Some people just wanted to get away from the hearing people that weren't understanding of their experience in the world. Some of them just felt like it was easier to live in a quieter place with less sensory experiences. So every single person had a story, and whether or not it was on the page, those stories mattered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you're articulating the sense of danger in the current world, and in the world that could become from our world. I think, if we talk about fascism or what we all sort of fear about things that could happen, I don't hear as much about the negative impacts for people with disabilities and on the disabled population at large. I think it's really enlightening to consider and think through those possibilities. And also these sort of micro moments of fear too, for example, for people with invisible disabilities who have handicap placards. When we park in disabled spaces, then often we could get sort of glares or people acting strangely because they don't know if you're properly using that placard, which is also feels like a much less intense than losing your child, obviously, but a sort of dangerous situation out in public where this is the only way that you can really have access to spaces because walking further is too hard, but you're made to feel uncomfortable or that you don't belong even when you're using resources that were allocated for you.
Wow. Yeah. No, well said. And this ties into a question from the audience. Maria asks that she says this story was very enlightening to me. It was a way for me to sort of gain empathy in a community that I'm not a part of. Are there other readings? She doesn't specify if this is fiction or I'd probably start with Being Seen, right? Elsa's memoir. Any other sort of readings that we might direct Maria to?
I highly recommend picking up Disability Visibility, edited by Alice Wong. It's a collection of essays written by disability rights activists, authors, and just disabled people. And it reflects a wide experience of disability, which I think is really valuable. I am also in that collection, but Alice collected some really incredible work that I highly recommend that people read. You can also read Alice's memoir, Year of the Tiger, which is incredible. It came out this September. So there's 3 books for you: Being Seen, Disability Visibility, and Year of the Tiger. Those are all nonfiction. For fiction, I recommend looking into the work of Marika Nijkamp, who writes beautifully about autistic characters and physically disabled characters. I would look at Lily Lainoff's One for All, which is a YA about fencers with POTS. And I would look at the Miles Vorkosigan books, which is an oldie but a goodie. Lois McMaster-Bujold wrote a physically disabled character in a space opera, and it's an incredible series that really does delve into what it's like to be physically disabled in a society that is ableist. The author herself is not disabled, but it's one of the rare instances where I will suggest that you read it anyway.
Wonderful. Put those on your list, Maria. Laura, any thoughts from you on other readings?
I don't have any other specific readings to recommend. There may be some films and short stories, but maybe I could send those afterward and we could post them.
Yeah. We'll make sure to recording of this conversation. We'll put it on YouTube, and then feel free to comment with any additional things. We'll sort of assemble what we can sort of internally, but we'll leave that up to sort of the comments field. Also, Paul, my buddy Paul, who is watching from Colorado, mentions the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime, which is a mystery, and the protagonist is on the autism spectrum. So there's one of those too. So thanks, Paul. Thanks. Yeah.
There is one other work I would recommend. There's an autistic author, Jessica Jenkins. She has some poetry books. I would recommend her work as well. And I will write some in the comments. It's just hard for me to pull names out of the top of my head.
No worries. Excellent. We'll leave this open for a couple more audience questions. But yeah, Laura and Elsa, this is a great opportunity for you to just, chat. And I know that, usually when we do these sort of things, we have a conversation, as the story is being developed and working together. But any thoughts on each other's work as we wait for a couple more questions to come in from the audience?
I would love to ask you some more questions, Elsa, if you're up for that. So I wanted to ask you, well, maybe about the play structure for kids and how you envision like inclusive and adaptive play structures. And then I wanted to ask also about the sort of apartments and how you see those things coming to life. So, but I thought maybe the play structure is the coolest one to begin with and help people understand what that space could and should be like.
So if you go online, you can actually Google for adaptive playgrounds. There are swings that you can literally load an entire wheelchair onto, and then you can push the whole entire wheelchair and kid at once on a platform. And it's great because it gives wheelchair using kids the ability to play without having to get out of their wheelchair, which I think is a really big deal. That means that also other parts of the play structure need ramps, because you can get up and sort of going around and playing. So I'm imagining something that's pretty big. And I imagine that there is space for wheelchair basketball. And I imagine that there's also tactile spaces. So for me as a blind kid, I couldn't always see everything. And what would have helped me as a child would have been having information that was tactile for when I was about to go over an edge, or if there was something I was looking for with my feet. And so having information underneath the kids' feet, but also for their hands, would be really useful. I also imagine that everything would have Braille, like here's the slide in Braille, so that kids would know what they were going down.
Which is also a great way to learn how to read.
It is, yes. So there's a lot of different things, but I think most of all for me, it was about just creating a space where disabled kids and non-disabled kids could play. Because one of the things that was important to note in the story is that not all the kids are disabled. Some of them are non-disabled, even though the parents are disabled.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the kids are disabled, but their parents aren't, because the parents moved there for their kids. Mm-hmm. And so that is the space that I wanted to envision, is that one place that truly is for both non-disabled and disabled people at the same time. Because the kids are a generation that's being raised with no barriers and full inclusion.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come up for me on that, where I imagine, what if we had Braille throughout the space? And so everyone would have the chance to touch it and then start to learn to read Braille and understand better. I was also curious, what if there was like an olfactory or a smell portion of the playground, or maybe a part of the playground snakes through the forest, and that's like a smell walk that's safe for all the kids. Have you ever experienced something like a smell sort of blind friendly or created for blind users smell experience or play structure or anything like that?
There is a really gorgeous garden, I think it's in France, I want to say, that was specifically designed with really fragrant flowers for blind people to enjoy, but I haven't seen it as a play space in that way. But that's an interesting idea. I think that sort of, and I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea of it just being sort of a smell experience, because blind kids are just as rambunctious as non-blind kids. And so like, I think a blind kid might be really bored by, oh, it's just a nice place to smell things. And so it's more about making sure that they get to have the same rambunctious childhood that other kids have. And so the other piece that I would have is I would definitely have, how there are outdoor crash pads, definitely would have spaces for those, because that way, if you can't see very well, you can still play tag. And if you fall down, you fall down.
But the olfactory, I mean, to respond to what you're suggesting, what if these olfactory experiences are not like precious flowers that you can't throw around, but like something like those squishy toys that have smells, but in a natural
Oh yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah. The weird the slime toys that have smell. A friend of mine's kid is really into those. She has like 30 of them. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
around
that's a
the
little
corner.
bit different.
Yeah. Something, so your point is that if we're doing something with smell, it should be playable. It should be like bounceable.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it should be interactive, truly. Yeah, that's excellent. And then I was wondering, how do you imagine like those ideal little cabins? What are those built like on the inside? You give us a glimpse into, some of the sort of adaptations and how it works with the lights and everything. I was wondering if there's anything else, any other vision you have there about how those should be, what they should be like.
I mean, I think the problem is that it's individual to every single character. And that's part of why I didn't go into too much detail, because each one is so different. And to me, that speaks to the level of customization that disabled people truly need.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
every disability is completely different. Um,
so what would you want to
yeah.
rephrase it?
I mean, mine would have lights that I could adjust verbally rather than using my hands, because I find that I can never quite get the slider right on the, excuse me, on the lights. They would be able to be very, very bright, but they wouldn't be fluorescents, because fluorescents give me migraines. Everything would be color coded so that I could find things in my kitchen. The TV would have really cozy chairs that were closer than sighted people need them to be, because I like playing video games.
Yeah.
Also, there wouldn't be a ladder up to the bed, because I don't do ladders unless if there's someone at the bottom of them. But I would have like really good stairs with a really good banister, or I would just have a single floor cabin. And I like going upstairs, so I probably wouldn't be too mad about it. But like, I also would have all of the books, because even though I can't physically read books anymore, I like having books around. And they're
Yeah.
actually really important to me. So I would not have books. What else would I have? I would probably have a dog door, because my tiny corgi would need to be able to get in and out, and I don't always have the energy to take her outside.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and the adaptations are really subtle for me. Other things, there would be a visual doorbell, because I can't hear when people come to my door.
Yeah. Beautiful. These are such beautiful design ideas. I guess the other space I would love to ask you about and talk about more together is the communal dining hall. So they come into this communal dining hall, which has all these spaces for, everybody and their specific needs. I was curious, do you think there might be something in there like assuming a little bit of a escalation of technology, like a window to their family or community that might be outside, so they could sort of like dine with family who still live in the outside world? Or do you think that they would need to remain sort of logged off from the outside world too much to be able to do that? How do you think about that?
I don't know. I mean, I think on the one hand, it would depend on their relationships with family. For a lot of adult disabled people, relationships with your family can be really challenging. And so I don't know how many of them would actually be in touch. But for the ones who were, yeah, I'm sure that there would be some kind of Zoom holographic thing you could do to have dinner together. And I think it was doable, because those kinds of things are controllable tech in that world.
Yeah.
You would be able to communicate. But yeah, I think that it would be challenging, not so much because of the tech, but because those relationships can often be fraught. I mean, good. I think the cold is trying to sneak in.
Sorry. I know you've been battling a cold at home. Okay.
Yes. But I also think that the space would be big enough that people with conflicting access needs could still be in the same space. And what I mean by that is, if one person has a guide dog and somebody else is afraid of dogs or is allergic, there has to be a room for both of them to be able to eat meals. And so maybe there's a room that's off to the side that is for the dog users and handlers, and maybe there's space that's allergen free. But I think that that's part of what I'm envisioning is space for everybody's needs to be met at the same time.
Yeah, excellent.
And this sort of ties into my final question for the two of you. For this cycle of stories and events in Us and Flux, we're using this as a way to dive into possible civic experiments, right? Prototype new ideas about how we might emerge from this very odd period of time that we're in and move into better futures together. And so for the two of you, Elsa, I'll let you take the speaking stick first. What does the island have to say about the future that you'd like to inhabit?
I think what it's saying is that I'd like non-disabled people to be mindful that this is where we might have to go if non-disabled people don't figure out how to include us. What I mean by that is that right now, non-disabled people don't really understand how to include disabled people. We're often the group that's left out of inclusion statements. We're often the group that isn't talked about. And so I think for non-disabled people, it's about learning to include us now so that it's easier to do so in the future. So that's really what I'm hoping that people take away, is that we shouldn't have to want to go elsewhere. But right now, that's the future that seems the most hopeful to me.
Yeah. Laura, what about you?
Can you rephrase the question for me?
Yeah. So, with this story and Elsa's vision of this future, what does this story have to say about the very real world that you'd like to inhabit going forward?
Yeah, I think Elsa's story really powerfully allows you to enter a lot of parts of the disabled experience and also rethink your own relationship to that experience. And I hope it also helps people consider all the little things that could be done to our spaces and between our interactions to make the world better for everyone, but also to make it safe for all of us and for us to feel at home in these different places and spaces. I guess in Elsa's story, I feel hit like a wall by the sense of home when you come to the island, and the idea that if we understand that our people are of very diverse abilities, then how do we create that home for all of us in a space where we don't have to go off to an island? Yeah. So I think it's really enlightening to what we might need.
Yeah. To make a home for all of us. Yeah.
And how exciting and beautiful that place can be. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great. It is a striking story. I know that we've probably, just spoiled it all over, but please do go check it out if you haven't already. Thank you both for being here and for this conversation. Elsa, Laura, can you let people know where to find you and where to follow your work?
You can find me as Snarkbat, literally everywhere on the internet, SNARKBAT. And it is the website that I have, snarkbat.com, and it's also my Twitter handle, so that you can find me there. I have a short story coming out in 2 weeks on Sunday Morning Transport called The Found Recollections of the Last Oracle of Revelor, which is also about disability. And that's it for me right now, but there's plenty of exciting things coming that I can't talk about yet.
All right, add that one to your reading list too, Maria. There's more to come. Laura, what about you? Where can folks find you online or elsewhere?
So you can write me if you like, if you want to talk about disability, at lcechano@asu.edu. And then I guess my handle tends to be La Chacha, which is LACECHA, in honor of my friend Hannah Frank, who passed away very tragically, but she came up with this handle for me. So you can find me throughout the world in that form. And then also on Vimeo, if you look up Laura Cechanowicz, or vimeo.com/IamLaura.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And you can find us, along with all of our previous Us in Flux stories and so much more, at csi.asu.edu. You can follow us on social media if that's your bag. You just search Imagination ASU on your platform of choice, excuse me, and you're likely to find us there. So at Imagination ASU or csi.asu.edu. On behalf of my co-host and co-editor, Joey Esherick, the team at CSI, including Nina Miller, who created striking original artwork for all of these stories, and the rest of the team, we want to thank you so much for reading and watching and imagining with us during this series. Also, special thanks to John S. Martinson for his generous support of this cycle of stories and events. Thank you so much, John. And thank you all for being with us through this summer, and of course more to come. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you again in the future. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much.